Hey everyone, I wanted to record this video real quick because an issue came to my attention here recently. A lot of you've probably heard the story about a disabled woman with a service dog went into a nail spa here at a local business and was quickly asked to leave the establishment due to the service dog being with her. I wanted to touch on this because it's an issue that typically gets taken up as an emotional thing. And of course, as existing law has it, and yes, I know that the law does state that the person cannot refuse them service based on the fact that they're disabled and they have to allow the service dog in their establishment. But I actually take issue with that. And like I said, this is typically something that's taken at from an emotional angle, and I completely get it. I understand, people want to be kind. Somebody that's disabled can't exactly help that they got that way. But you also have to look at things from a different perspective as well. And I kind of wanted to address that. First of all, I'm not going to make any excuses for the guy's rudeness. Me personally, if it was my place of business, I wouldn't refuse service to somebody just because they had a service dog with them. But I do believe that the person that owns this particular business has rights, and those rights ought to be protected, and he ought to have a right to say who can and can't come into his store. So first of all, I'm going to take an approach at this from a private property perspective. A lot of people don't think about private property whenever it comes to businesses. They think business is public because you think you're out and about in public whenever you're visiting businesses. But it very much is private property. And if you ask any sole proprietor, somebody that's worked hard their whole lives, save up the money to start a business, they very much see that as their personal private property. They don't see it as just part of the public. They've put their life and their blood, sweat, and tears into that place, and they see it just as important to them as it is their home is. And really, whenever you start to think about it, there's nothing that really fundamentally changes about the principle of private property whenever somebody's running a business and whenever they just have a house. Just because you choose to use your private property for leisure and make it totally useless to society other than yourself and your family, doesn't make it more special and you get more rights than somebody who chose to do something more productive with it and offer services and goods to society that the society wants. So bear that in mind whenever we're talking about private property. So just like you wouldn't want somebody to be able to tell you what you can and can't do and who you can and can't allow on your property at your home or inside your home, it really doesn't make any sense to be able to tell a business owner just because he's chosen to be more productive with his property what he can and can't do with that property. Banding together as a group of people and calling yourselves a government and thinking that everybody gets a say-so in what this particular person does because he's using his property for productive purposes and making a profit doesn't make a lot of sense. And that's kind of my argument, is it's really immoral. It's immoral to actually use force and violence. Essentially what people are trying to do is they're saying maybe a private lawsuit. Maybe this person is entitled to, financial compensation for not having been served at this establishment, or maybe the government should fine them, or maybe the government should shut them down. But essentially what you're talking about is you want either the person or the government, essentially, because even in a lawsuit, the enforcement's going to be, on the government. I mean, if you get a lawsuit, you don't get to go to that person's house and collect on them personally. So enforcement either way is going to be done by the government. So essentially what you're talking about is you want the government to use a police officer, a law enforcer, with a gun to either go to this business establishment or go to the person at their private home and threaten them with being abducted, put in prison, extorted out of money, or coerced into forcefully doing what somebody else wants them to do with their property. And my suggestion is that's actually immoral. Just like it would be insane to think that a bunch of people could band together and democratically vote on who I'm allowed to have on my property. If I don't want such and such here for whatever reason, it's my yard, it's my house, I get to make the rules here. It's kind of like you have national government, state government, local government. Well, my yard, my castle, that's my governing area. That's where I have domain. So I get to choose what happens on this property. And private property is pretty important. The consequences of getting rid of private property is the same consequences we see in communism, because that's what communism wants to do, is abolish private property. First of all, you have to be able to own yourself. Just your body itself is your property. And that's what fundamentally establishes private property rights, is you own your body. Nobody else can lay claim to that. And therefore, in turn, you use your body as equipment to produce labor to, earn profit. Over time, you can either hold that in cash, you can own that in other property. Either way, all of this comes down to property. Your cash is your property. You purchase land, that's your property. You purchase a car, that's also your property. Everything comes down to the fruits of your labor. So whenever you're talking about this business owner, he spent his entire life, working, sweating, bleeding to save up enough money to start this business. And then he starts this business, well, that's his life. So if you were to say, well, just shut him down and just take all of his money, give it to this person because he did something wrong to him. Well, essentially, you're actually talking about committing murder. It's like a partial murder, because what you're doing is you're taking a part of that person's life that they spent working and saying that was essentially for nothing. They might as well have been dead, because the fruits of that labor are now gone. We're stealing it from you. So in essence, here you're really equating theft with murder, because you've killed so many years of this person's life, so many hours that they've spent on the job trying to get the money to start this business that's now been stolen from them, on the pretext that somebody else is entitled to be able to do business there, when that's not really the case. Nobody is entitled to be on somebody else's property. Nobody is entitled to somebody else's labor. Actually, entitlements to other people's labor is what we used to call slavery. So regardless of whether you think that you're compensating them fairly or enough, that's not exactly how it works, because in slavery you could have had people trying to make arguments about, well, they got 3 hots and a cot, they were compensated fairly enough, so that wasn't really slavery, they got paid. Well, that's just ridiculous, of course. So whenever we talk about private property, we're talking about ownership of self, we're talking about ownership of the fruit of your labors, and that doesn't just all of a sudden change, and we don't all of a sudden get rights or entitled to other people's property just because they take it and start to use it for more productive purposes. Two, I would like people to think about an interesting thought experiment by Dr. Peter Kreeft. And this thought experiment was actually put together to address the issues of the problem of evil whenever trying to disprove God. And Peter Kreeft was arguing that the thought experiment was basically, think about yourself getting trapped into a nightmare where you're constantly being chased by a monster that's seeking to just destroy you, and how awful that would be. And then the opposite side is to think about a nightmare in which you become that monster. Which do you think is worse? I think most people would say that the greatest evil would not be finding yourself stuck in, a scary circumstance, but finding yourself stuck in a circumstance where you are the destroyer, where you're committing the evil. And that's kind of my biggest thing is, no, we don't live in a perfect world. Bad stuff like this happens where people are, what we feel is treated unfairly. I would have preferred the man just served the person and been kind, but I would also rather the disabled person be stuck in a circumstance where, it's an awful circumstance, but they couldn't help it and none of us can help it, and the guy just kind of has a choice to be a jerk, which isn't a crime, rather than us all turn around and band together and become the evil doer and going after this person and trying to use violence and coercion and force and threatening to try to get this person to do what we want them to do, just because we think, you know, this or that person's entitled to this or that. So that's something to kind of bear in mind, is, you know, we could allow some evil things to happen, or we could become the evil doers. And me personally, I would rather find myself in an awful circumstance than putting people in awful circumstances. So I just wanted to address those points really quick, because it's an awful lot to type out. It's a lot easier to just throw together a video. My thoughts are all kind of jumbled up, so I'm sure there's 1,000 questions, and I probably didn't say all these things as clear as I could have. So if you have any questions, just throw them out in the comments and let me know what you think.